Introduction. Corruption is thought to be a significant problem in much of the developing world. Corruption not only imposes a tax on public services and private sector activity, it also creates potentially severe efficiency consequences as well. Yet, despite the importance of the problem, eliminating corruption has proved difficult in all but a few developing countries. One potential reason why corruption is so persistent is that citizens may not have accurate information about corruption. After all, since corruption is illegal, regularly and directly observing corrupt activity is almost always impossible. If citizens have accurate information about corruption, then the democratic process and grassroots monitoring can potentially provide incentives for politicians to limit corruption. If, on the other hand, citizens have little in the way of accurate information about corrupt activity, or even if citizens know about average levels of corruption, but do not know who is corrupt and who is honest, then the political process may not provide sufficient incentives to restrain corruption. The accuracy of corruption perceptions is also important because of the ubiquitous use by international institutions and academics to measure corrupt activity. For example, corruption perceptions from the basis of the much cited cross country transparency international corruption index and World Bank governance indicators and are used extensively within countries as well to assess governance at the subnational level. Perceptions also have been widely used in academic research on the determinants of corruption. Measuring perceptions about corruption rather than corruption itself skirts the inherent difficulties involved in measuring corruption directly, but raises the question of how those being surveyed from their perceptions in the first place, and how accurate are those reported perceptions actually are. The paper examines the empirical relationship between reported corruption perceptions and a more objective measure of corruption in the context of a road building program in rural Indonesia. To construct an objective measure of corruption, I assembled a team of engineers and surveyors who, after the roads built by the project were completed, dug core samples in each road to estimate the quantity of materials used, surveyed local suppliers to estimate prices, and interviewed villagers to determine the wages paid on the project. From these data, I construct an independent estimate about the amount each road actually cost to build, and then compare this estimate to what the village reported it spent on the project on a line item by line item basis. The difference between what the village claimed the road cost to build and what the engineers estimated it actually cost to build formed my objective measure of corruption, which I label missing expenditures. To obtain data on villagers' reported perceptions of corruption in the same set of villages, I also conducted a household survey in which villagers were asked about the likelihood of corruption in the road project. Using these data, I find that villagers reported perceptions of the likelihood of corruption in the road project do contain information about the level of missing expenditures in the project. Moreover, villagers are sophisticated enough in their reported perceptions to distinguish between general levels of corruption in the village and corruption in the particular road project I examined. However, reported perceptions of corruption contain only a limited amount of information. Increasing the missing expenditures measured by 10% is associated with just a 0.8% increase in the probability a villager believes that there is any corruption in the project. One reason villagers' information about corruption may be limited is that officials have multiple methods of hiding corruption and choose to hide corruption in the places where it is hardest for villagers to detect. In particular, my analysis suggests that villagers are able to detect marked up prices but appear unable to detect inflated quantities of material used in the road project. Consistent with this, the vast majority of corruption in the project occurs by inflating quantities with almost no markup of prices on average. The inability of villagers to detect inflated quantities, combined with the fact that officials can substitute between hiding corruption as inflated prices or inflated quantities, suggests that officials may be strategic in how they hide corruption, and that effective monitoring requires specialist auditors who can detect multiple layers of corruption. The fact that the overall correlation between reported corruption perceptions and missing expenditures is positive. However, it is not sufficient to show that the two variables can be interchangeably can be used interchangeably as measures of corruption. In particular, reported perceptions may be systematically biased, either because individuals' beliefs are biased or because conditional on their true beliefs. The way individuals report corruption is biased. I first show that even controlling for village fixed effects and therefore controlling completely flexibly for the actual level of corruption on the road and benchmarking for how respondents answer the corruption question in other contexts. Individual characteristics such as education and gender systematically predict respondents' reported perceptions of corruption in the road project. I show that these biases are not affected by how the respondents are told the information will be used, which suggests that they may be biased in the respondents' underlying beliefs rather than simply biases on how respondents choose to report their perceptions on the survey.